proposed and proceeding.
The Senate on the 25th of May passed the Petroleum Industry Governance Bill, which is part of the Petroleum Industry Bill. This is the first time this critical legislation has reached this stage in the Senate. Experts believe that the bill will stimulate Nigeria's oil and gas sector as well as reduce corruption in the sector. The bill is expected to create a conducive business environment for petroleum operations, enhance exploration of petroleum resources for the benefit of Nigerians, optimize domestic gas supplies, establish profit-driven oil entities, and create efficient and effective regulatory agencies in the petroleum sector. For better understanding of these laws, Dr. Dayo Ayoade, an associate professor of international law, speaks on the Petroleum Industry Governance Bill recently passed by the Senate.
The reform process has been ongoing now for well over a decade. I mean, it started with President Olusegun Obasanjo's time. So you can imagine it's gone through President Obasanjo, through President Yar'Adua, President Goodluck Jonathan, and now we're with President Buhari, and the end does not seem in sight. What we have right now is not actually the Petroleum Industry Bill as originally envisaged. What we have, as you said, is a part of it. We have the Petroleum Industry Governance Bill. So it's just one of the aspects of the original Petroleum Industry Bill. And that's the one that's gone through the National Assembly. It's with the Senate. The Senate has passed it. And we're still waiting for I think that was in May. And we're still waiting for the House of Reps to look at the bill and also to pass it before they have to come together to reconcile the bill before it can be put before the President. The Petroleum Industry Governance Bill, which is what has been passed, is essentially to reform the regulatory and institutional framework that governs the petroleum industry. It's going to provide a different framework. You will have a new set of regulators. You will have a Petroleum Regulatory Commission. The DPR will vanish. The NNPC itself will no longer be there. You're going to have a National Petroleum Company. So it's an overhaul of the institutional framework.
He explains the benefits the country will gain if the oil and gas sector is allowed to be determined by market players.
The passage of the bill, of course, does not solve problems just like that. There's no magic wand. You have to have in place proper laws, proper policies, proper environments conducive to business. You mentioned the issue of maybe fuel issues. Fuel issues, downstream issues have been complicated for a long time. The issue is simple. Should the government be in charge of the downstream sector? Should they regulate prices? Or should we deregulate and let the market choose the price? You see, if the market chooses the price, we will have fuel. But the price could first be very high. And that's the danger. And you know the political problems that comes with very high fuel prices, as other governments have found to their costs, can bring people onto the streets, trade unions, strikes and what have you. But more importantly is the fact that this bill can transform the way the industry does business. What we have right now is a lose-lose situation, not win-win. We have lose-lose right now. Right now what we have is that we've been waiting for well over a decade. If you spend 12, 13, 14 years waiting for a law to be passed, what does that tell the investor? You don't know what you want. Regulatory uncertainty, business uncertainty. Who is going to invest money in a place where they don't know what the business environment is going to be like? Even if you have to open a sweet shop, you must know what the business environment is like before you go and get your money. You rent a shop, buy sweets, and put it inside. And so the oil industry being a multi-billion-dollar business, an international business, people rather take their money to other countries that are ready to do business today. And so when we sort ourselves out, they'll come. But what does that mean? We are losing money. Tens of billions of dollars investment has gone missing. Nobody's investing because there's no point investing if you don't know what the future is going to look like. And we're in a chaotic situation that needs to be urgently resolved. That's why I'm pleased that the government seems to be doing something about it. The current petroleum minister talks about his 7 big wins, where he talks about putting in place policies, putting in place a good business environment and so forth. These are all very good, but we all need everybody to come together, the stakeholders. The National Assembly must play its role until we get legislation in place. There's nothing the federal government can do until that legislation secures an outlook for where we are going in the oil industry.
The Associate Professor of International Law gives solutions to the grey areas in the PIGB document.
You find that unions have always fought against reform. Let's give you an example of, and I would ask the trade unionists to look at an example like the telecoms industry. When telecoms industry was starting up, we saw the same opposition from vested interests. Nitel should always enjoy its monopoly, or our members will be sacked. The numbers that have been employed now by the reformed mobile GSM companies is a lot more than those that were employed ever by Nitel, enjoying extremely good conditions of service. I think they just have to look at history, to look at industrial change. Industrial change sometimes involves pain in the short term. But then let me ask you, what is the pain we are talking about? If we are growing the industry, if the oil industry, the downstream sector, is deregulated, and therefore marketers can bring in their fuel and sell at a commercial rate, and therefore become profitable, what does that mean? They hire more workers. So why should the oil unions be worried that their members will be sacked? In the initial stage, when the industry is in a bit of flux, there could be a bit of movement of people crossing away from those companies that are closing down to those who are springing up. And those who are springing up in the commercially vibrant environment are more likely to last. Using government money to fund or to provide subsidies to keep jobs does not work in the medium term. It certainly does not work in the long term. It is not in the interest of the union to hold back the entire nation.
For over 20 years, the country was unable to build new refineries for its own uses, but depends on its old refineries, which experts say cannot meet the demand of its citizens. Mr. Zakar Bala, an energy expert, insists that the nation needs at least 4 new refineries.
In the context of Nigeria, it is the approach of the current generation of leaders that has changed everything. And this is the practical example. If you look at it, from 1965 to 1989, you're talking about a span of 24 years. The then generation of leaders that were probably less educated, less exposed, having less money, were able to construct 4 refineries. The first refinery was in 1965, the effort of the military and the private companies then. The second refinery was the Warri refinery in 1978. The third refinery was the Kaduna refinery in 1980. And the fourth refinery was the second Port Harcourt refinery in 1989. So you're talking about 4 refineries in 24 years. And that gives you an average of 1 refinery in 6 years. But from 1990 to now, 2017, you're talking about 27 good years. The current generation of leaders have not been able to construct 1 additional refinery and have not even been able to maintain the one they inherited. Doesn't that on its own just tell you that we are going to have energy crisis? From 1990 to now, 27 years, at an average of 1 refinery in 6 years, we're supposed to have 4 additional refineries. So it's just the approach. The current generation of leaders have drifted. And from 1990 to now that we're talking about 27 years, we're not talking about a particular person. Because between that time and now, we had a new crop of military leaders. We had democratic leaders. And even among the democratic leaders, people belonging to different parties. So you're not talking about dispensation or political party. You're talking about leadership mentality. We have what? Drifted.
He gives some solutions to the fuel crisis rocking the country.
Using trains and wagons. Trains and wagons go to these points of discharge, whether they are Apapa or anywhere. Then they haul them to the different states and cities. Tankers are supposed to be limited to just metropolitan cities. And when you do that, first of all, this long hauling of refined products will not happen. The destruction to our roads, whose road chemistry and soil chemistry we don't know, will not also be happening. The carnage will not also be happening. The spilling on our roads will not be happening. So that will be the advantage of good distribution logistics. Ordinarily, it is just trains and wagons that should come to Apapa or any ports where we have these refined products, then move them to different parts of the country. Then it is just tankers now and trucks that will be limited to metropolitan cities to pick from probably the railway stations or where you have these trains and wagons, and take them to the filling stations. So that will help in distribution logistics.
There are two more parts of the PIB left to be passed, namely the Petroleum Industry Fiscal Bill and the Host Community Development Bill. Experts believe if the document is finally passed into law, it will allow more investors to do business in the country and ultimately solve the problems in the oil and gas sector.